This week in Teams, Jay and Craig are in person at SharePoint Chicago, where we got to talk with Microsoft subject matter experts, MVPs, and industry professionals. We also sat down with Andy Huneycutt to learn about his travel-ready recording studio. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jay Leesk. I'm with my usual suspects, Craig Janke. How you doing, Craig?
Good. I'm just trying to figure out how to not look at the microphone.
I'm sure you'll succeed somehow. We are at SharePoint Fest Chicago. Today is July 29th. It's the end of the morning session, and they just started putting lunch out. So very exciting. The days are moving, and this is day 4 of the conference if you were here for workshops.
I was not, so for me it's day 2.
All right. How's the conference going so far, Craig?
Pretty good. I actually had some cool sessions. I thought I had a Team Live Events session talking about how to get started with that. That had a number of people in it, and I was happy about that because I was like, nobody showed up for my session. And then I did Ask Microsoft Everything, and I got to actually speak there. Somebody asked a question that only I knew, which was really impressive to me.
You had some big names at that table. Who was with you?
Dan Holmes, Bob German, Liz Sundit, Kathy, what's they do?
Oh boy.
I'm horrible with names. Now I got to pull out the thing. So there were a bunch of people, some Microsoft TC MVPs, not MVPs, architects. Yeah, I don't know.
Some pretty high, well-known people.
I think Dan Holmes was there, and that was just my focus was he's the big guy, right? So
that makes sense. Yeah. He was the keynote of the conference, actually.
He was.
Which I got to see all of 5 minutes of it before my sales team reached out, panicked, because there was no prep for a meeting and they needed my help.
Well, I had a 9 a.m. session I had this session immediately after the keynote, so I spent all my time looking at my presentation and making sure that I actually knew what I was supposed to be talking about.
Yeah, well, I know that feeling very well. I feel like every session's been like that. So for me, I had a workshop all day on Monday talking about migration, talking about why migration is not just moving content and configuring technology, but actually properly setting up the day 2 and the day after migration content capabilities. I did a session on hybrid SharePoint with you. That was a lot of fun. Hybrid with a big H, not just I have SharePoint in multiple places. We did a migration session just now that actually had really good attendance and some decent interaction with people.
Yeah, no, that one was really cool. We actually had some people come back from the session we did on the hybrid, so that was really impressive to me because I didn't expect to see anybody who's already seen us present to come back.
So we didn't mess up so badly the first time. They came back for more.
Yes.
And then yesterday afternoon, I did a session on information governance, which I take what I feel is a different approach. People talk about information governance. The assumption is you're talking about records management. And while that is a big portion of it, you're also talking about the management of the containers for those workspaces. So very exciting to be able to bring all of that together. The conference is still going, another day and a half left. Anything you're excited about?
I am excited for you to look at your schedule to see what session you're actually presenting, and I know that's what you're doing.
That is exactly what I'm doing.
I do have a last end of day session on what am I doing? Microsoft Viva and Workplace Analytics. I'm actually excited about that because there were people that asked questions specifically about that at the Ask Microsoft Anything session, so I'm hoping they're going to show up for it.
Yep. And I'm glad. So everyone keeps asking me what my session is on a Friday. I keep forgetting. So my session tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., I'm doing a session on Teams, Groups, SharePoint, and Yammer, and what to use when, which with Microsoft 365 seems to be a pretty consistent conversation. What tool do I use? And really, it's what tool do you want me to use for what is the approach I tend to take to it.
Nice.
What's that?
I said nice.
Yeah.
I was agreeing with you.
Oh, that's unusual.
Just coming out of our last session, though, that we did on the migration to a modern SharePoint, one of the comments that I wanted to talk to you about, and I mentioned it briefly, is I was interested because that was a pretty full session for the conference. So, I think the misnomer around the industry is everybody's up on Office 365, and it's just how are they going to extend it? But there's apparently a lot of people still trying to figure out how to get there.
Yep.
So some good topics and good questions that we had on that.
Actually, one of the things I really appreciate about it is a number of the people who have attended my migration sessions, both the workshop and the session with you, is they are people who have migrated a bunch of stuff, but they're recognizing that simply migrating content isn't enough. So they're coming back to the basics to understand, hey, what did we miss and how can we course correct? So very exciting stuff.
Yeah, that was awesome. Then we had the one lady walk up to us after the session and basically just say that. I did it. Now I want to know what I didn't do right.
Yep. So one of the things that we talked about in that session, Craig, and I think the goal of the next 10 or so minutes here is to talk about when it comes to a migration, you are moving stuff into Office 365. Generally speaking, your source is a very siloed system. So it's a file share. So people are just dumping content in. Or it's SharePoint, which people are just dumping content in unless you have a more mature system, in which case you might have business apps developed into the tool set. And one thing that you brought up is when you move to Office 365, you have the opportunity to look at those systems and determine what is the right destination for this. Should it go in OneDrive?
Right.
Should it go in a team site of some sort, or maybe even Microsoft Teams? That was your opportunity to build on top of it.
It was, yeah. So actually, I think we need to take a step back. And it's a good opportunity to look to see what we have as content, as we have talked about a number of times, and see if it's content that we even need to move, right? Is it old content? Has anybody touched it?
Yep.
We both have the stories of how content has been there for, God, now we're getting old, but 10 to 15 years, right? 20 or more. Mostly, there's no real reason why you should have to keep that documentation. And anything that's older than that, or that old, really a lot of times becomes a liability to your company and not assets. So it becomes discoverable in cases of lawsuits and things like that. And you don't want to have that material around there. Also, we've seen multiple copies of everything, right? People save they save the files off 3-4 times with multiple versions. Do you need that? We have the stories, both of us have the stories of salespeople saving their entire DVD collection and videos. I've got the story of the hunter with the GoPro. Every time he went into the woods, was recording that.
Yep.
That's all stuff you don't really want to move, right? So we can clean up that. And then, as you said, we can go and decide how we want the new structure to look and feel, because if we're coming from a SharePoint site, then it's probably a very topological organization where we've got the main site collection and run 5 or 6 or 7 levels deep in some cases. And you're fond of saying the world is now flat.
Yes. Yeah, so as you are migrating into Office 365, one of the big things that I talk about with people is Microsoft's cloud solution does not work the way 2010 did. If you are standing up, if you're creating a new collaboration space, 99 times out of 100, you are getting a SharePoint site collection. You are at the topmost level. And the way we used to do things is we would create a site collection, and we would give that site collection to an administrator at the division or department level and say, you can do anything you want to do in here. Well, you can still do that, but how do you associate a team that someone creates with that very nested infrastructure? And we'll go one step further. One of the problems that we always had was that search was terrible in SharePoint.
Right.
And one of the reasons it was terrible is because you were creating this nested infrastructure that the index just didn't know what to do with. So in Office 365, the index, if you go past 3-4 levels, the index is not going to give you good results with your search. So breaking that nested infrastructure into a flat architecture becomes a big part of the conversation, something that you have to be doing. And if you're listening to this and the North American Collaboration Summit hasn't happened yet, Joy Apple and I have a whole day dedicated to having that conversation.
Nice. Yeah, and I've heard that speech, or not speech before, but the presentation with you and Joy have done, and it's really good. So if you can make it to Branson or being able to join it online, I highly recommend it.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, you're now at this stage where you have to rethink how is your content architected. How are we securing that content? One of my favorite stories is an organization I once worked for where the VP reached out to the person who owned the migration to SharePoint Online and said, we have a data spill. And really what we had was security through obscurity breaking, because that's how Microsoft Online stuff works. So they had their compensation plan in their file share. It was then their whole file share, their whole private file share was put into their shared with everyone in OneDrive. And then when it was put into the cloud and everything was enabled, one of their subordinates was notified by Delve that, hey, this file is being touched by your boss a lot.
Yeah.
It's probably important to you. And so you had this situation where there wasn't a data spill. You had poor data practices, and a tool that's designed to bring to your focus things that might be valuable. So really, this is when you reevaluate your content. That old lift and shift method doesn't work. And so, tomorrow's presentation, should I use a team? Should I use a SharePoint site collection? Should I use Yammer? That's exactly the kind of conversation an IT person has to have, focused on business capabilities and business needs.
Yeah, I think what the biggest part with Office 365, and it kind of gets forgotten sometimes, is it's a collaboration first mentality as Microsoft had it. So we want to make it as open as possible. We want people to be able to discoverable. That's why the search happens. That's why Viva Topics is now coming out to find information that you already have permission on, and surface that to you so that you can be more productive and be more knowledgeable in your organization. So that's what you said. Security's got to be front and center, and that comes with user training on doing the right thing, and having the right things in place. The other thing that with that collaboration first mentality is, when we talked about it in our session, was now you have to have a thought about provisioning and how are we going to create team sites. And within teams, that becomes very easy to do. And there's two things that you need to be cognizant of, right? We're thinking if you create a team, you want somebody to collaborate with. So
right.
They're being brought in as a member and a contributor in old SharePoint. So they have all those permissions. So you have to be aware of that and what material is actually in that team.
Yeah.
And then we had a couple of our people that were in our session talk about how they turned it on and they didn't have a good provisioning scenario.
Yep.
Yeah. And what happened, Jay?
So this was it was one of those opportunities to get the room talking, and I had the perfect two scenarios, and I added the third to it. We had someone with 200 employees. They had it wide open. They ended up with a lot of content they didn't want, a lot of teams and site collections they didn't want. And so they've locked it down since. And I asked, how many requests do you get through your form that you created to create a new team every week? And they said, maybe one, maybe two, but it really isn't a big load for me. I went, okay, perfect. So then we went to the next person, and that person had 1,500 employees. So from 200 to 1,500. And his answer was, I get about a dozen requests a week. And with those requests, I have to ask additional questions, because the form, while I asked specific questions, it didn't really get the details I was looking for every time. And then, because some of the things they're trying to do might be questionable, I have to get approvals, manual approval processes. Right. So I have to chase down a manager, or I have to chase down whatever, cybersecurity. And we asked them, so you get a dozen. We have 1,500 employees. We get a dozen requests a week, and we have over 1,700 sites and teams that have been created. And so you start to see this scale, this exponential scale of, oh man, you go from maybe manageable with 200 employees to a little bit harder to manage, maybe have to hire an extra body with 1,500 employees. And then we have, like, my customer, who has 85 to 90,000 employees, who they turned teams on at the beginning of COVID, and within a month they had 20,000 teams created.
And that's a maintenance nightmare.
It's a maintenance nightmare, but the other problem they had was they started looking at the teams that were created, and some of the adults that worked in this organization decided it was appropriate to create teams with curse words in the names. And so not only did they have that, and it wasn't just curse words, it was like, this senior leader person by name is a blah, and it's like, first of all, we can figure out who did this. That was a really poor decision. But second of all, like, we don't need this information. It's not appropriate. And so for them, the maintenance, so they locked it all down, and now they're getting these requests at a level that they have to have people purely dedicated to that.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the scale, 200 to 1,500 to 90,000, you're going to recognize that governance of just at the provisioning level is a really big problem. Then when you add in ongoing maintenance, you add in lifecycle management, you add in records management, and you very quickly realize that you either have to develop and configure something custom to handle all of this, or frankly, Microsoft has a third-party network of partners for a reason. Look at some of the partners and what they can provide.
Yeah. So you'll want to make sure that, well, starting for what you're talking about, at least have naming conventions. That is a good practice to do that. Have a provisioning process written out, explain it, documented on what they should be doing, what they should be requesting, and then where you're talking third party, or if you have to build it yourself, automate, right? So automation is your friend when you go to scale.
So from my perspective, just to kind of wrap the conversation a little bit, and then we'll see what else you wanted to talk about today. From my perspective, the other piece of this, you mentioned have your governance plan written down. Writing down a plan is not having governance. And this is another big wake up for most places, is if you do not automate as much of that as possible, all you've done is make a suggestion that your kid go to bed at 9 p.m. and turn off the lights. If you don't actually check, open the door, and see that they're laying down with the lights out, the chances are that at midnight they're still playing with their toys with the lights fully on and probably the radio blasting. Not that I speak from experience, but that's what you're looking at. So,
there's the old saying. I think it's accredited to Mike Tyson, but a plan is only good until you get punched in the face, right? So,
yes.
So until you start implementing, see what's happening. You got to be flexible. You got to be able to move. You got to be able to change that plan. So document it, plan it, and then have some kind of follow-up procedure. Automation is then making sure that plan is being enforced.
All right. So, Craig, what else did you want to talk about today? Because we have a special guest waiting on the sidelines.
I think that covers what I wanted to talk about, and I'm really excited to hear what our special guest is going to do. Awesome. I think you should give a special shout-out to Lance. Lance has been helping us from behind the scenes with all the technical features, and you guys can see that there's some pretty... No, you can't see that. There we go. There's Lance. And then there's a pretty cool setup over there. And then there's Jay.
All right.
And there's me.
Yeah, so
Jay's going to have fun with editing.
So we're using Teams. I'm going to throw this all in there. So we're using Teams to bring everyone in together, even though we're all sitting next to each other, because that's how low skill our podcast, our video cast is. All right. So here we go. We've got our special guest with us. This is Andy Huneycutt of Upskill Tech. Andy is an MVP, and you run the Charlotte user group, if I remember correctly.
So hello, thanks for having me. I'm out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and I run the Charlotte area SharePoint user group there.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy, for joining us. So this is one of the benefits of being at a conference. Not only are Craig and I in the same room together, but we have special guests like Andy and Lance able to join us and able to make our tech that much better. Now, one of the reasons I was really excited to get Andy in with us today is if you look at my video and you look at Craig's video and you look at Andy's video, and maybe even if you listen to the audio quality, although we're all using, well, anyway, what you're going to notice is Andy has a significantly more technical rig than what Craig and I are using. Part of that is because Craig and our microphones are at home. But frankly, I use the video that's built into my camera all the time, and Andy does not. So Andy, we were at the social hour the other night talking about things, and you started telling us about what you do, and so
and we were basically in awe of the system that he has. So we're like,
very true.
If you can teach,
I'm totally standing on the shoulder of giants that came before me. There's a lot of technical know-how in our community. And for me, it was just a matter of kind of piecing it together, a piece here, a piece there. Let me try this, let me try that. And really just trying to get a higher quality experience and just add value to presentations. And that's it also, like, working hybrid and remote for the last year. I needed to change it up. I needed to find a way to have a portable classroom. I needed to find a way to make presentations more engaging for the users that were participating in it. We can pull up Teams and we can just have that conversation, but if we can add a little bit more and keep people engaged and get them to not switch over to that browser window and, start
not
scrolling the net,
if
I can give them that face-to-face feedback and keep them, engaged with the presentation, it provides a lot more value. So that I really just put together things across the community, and I really have to say I learned a lot from the streamers, the video gamers playing on Twitch and and YouTube. Looking at some of the stuff they did introduced me to a couple of tools that were free, and from there,
we like free. We're all about free here.
Free.com.
So, and first of all, one of the things I love about this community is that it is not only acceptable, but almost expected that you are going to build off of what other people are doing. And that's one of the reasons why this community shares so much. So, I've seen people like Scott Hanselman share how they do picture-in-picture and actually how he does a virtual whiteboard using his computer. And
that was really slick.
Right?
I was really wowed by that. And then after he did it, it was one of those aha moments. Is like, that is actually super, super approachable.
Yep. So the more that people share, the more we get to learn, the more we get to do. So I expect in the next 6 months, Craig's and my rig will start to grow as we learn a little bit more about what Andy's doing. So Andy, you want to talk to us about
what you have?
Yeah, what you've done.
Yeah. So what I've done this week, so I did a workshop on Monday, and what I wanted to try to do was to bring a portable version of my workstation from home with me so that I could be on stage and present and still provide some of that experience that I've tried to cultivate with these tools and bring it to the workshop. And then I had to deliver a number of webinars for one of my clients, and the Wi-Fi in my hotel room was not very good. And so the conference center has really good Wi-Fi. And so
thanks, Lance.
I've been sitting here at the pod station for the last 3 days delivering webinars, and people are walking by and they're seeing this whole thing. But I wanted to be able to try to replicate the same webinar experience that I always deliver. So my setup is a little complicated, but I tried to do a portable version of it, and I'll try to walk you through some of that now. So you're seeing me inside of Microsoft Teams, and that's my high definition camera. So I'm actually using a mirrorless cam. It's got interchangeable lenses on it, and I've got that on a tripod or a gimbal, and that raises up the eye level. So I'm not looking down necessarily at the screen in front of me. I'm trying to, in many cases, make eye contact with the camera in front of me. But that camera actually does 4K, and then I downscale it to 1080p, so it goes through streaming platforms. But that gives me a really good picture in Microsoft Teams, and the lens that I'm using separates me from the background. So you can tell there's a background there, and it's just enough to be interesting, but not enough to be distracting. And then the camera I'm using has really good autofocus, so as I move forward and I move back inside of there, it's able to keep track of me.
And just to comment on that, so I have a number of coworkers who, and one of them's over in the corner listening, who their camera doesn't autofocus as nicely as yours does. So every once in a while they lean back.
You're like, where'd they go?
And they blur out.
Yeah.
Tom. I will say that my biggest issue is trying to keep eye contact with the camera.
Yeah, which clearly we're not doing today very well because we're sitting at it. Craig's doing a great job staring at his camera. Meanwhile, Andy and I are looking across Craig to see each other.
But every once in a while somebody will walk by and I see them.
You can tell the video angle, like your cameras are coming from below your eye level, whereas mine is actually on line with my eye level, and so that just gives a difference in the appearance there.
I'll tell you, I'm really glad I have a beard, so you don't see the three chins that are underneath it. So, all right, keep going.
Yeah, so I'm just using it's a mirrorless cam, interchangeable lens, and I could run that directly into the laptop. And like most of the cameras now, the newer ones, last 10 years or so, released software last year that allows you to plug in a mini USB to USB connector, and then they have webcam software. Sony and Nikon and Canon have all of that. But I found that the resolution was really, really low with that, and I used it for a little while with the Canon camera. But the picture wasn't as sharp as I wanted. It wasn't the same quality as my built-in webcam, so I didn't see the value in that. But some of these mirrorless cameras, they do an HDMI out, and they do a clean HDMI out signal, which means that you don't see any of the camera interface, any of the menu buttons or anything. So I'm running an HDMI out, and if you run it through a capture card, you can run that into your computer. The capture card that I'm actually using is the Blackmagic 80 Mini. It's a little overkill for this situation, but the 80 Mini allows you to plug in 4 separate camera feeds. So you could have 4 cameras or 2 cameras and 2 video inputs. You can even input another computer into that. Right. And it's a switcher and a capture card. And the benefit of that is that it's doing hardware encoding for the signal, downscaling 4K to 1080, and then it's doing a single input into my computer. But the 80 Mini would allow me to switch between multiple cameras if I wanted. I'm just using the one camera, but like sometimes I'll plug in my phone and use that as a second video feed, or I'll plug in another computer, and so that'll allow me to like pretend to be 2 separate entities. So like here's Andy the trainer, and then here's the person that is participating as another user.
That's fantastic.
Another way to do that is to like spin up a virtual machine, and you can run it local. I find that if you run it local, it eats up a lot of resources. Yeah. But if you run it like remote desktop connection, that's another way to do it. That's really helpful. But sometimes I have two computers at home, so I just run the second one in.
Okay.
So the 80 Mini is acting as my capture card and bringing the video signal into the computer. And because it's a hardware device, it's not eating up a ton of resources locally. From there, I have a couple other pieces. So I'm on my Mac Pro, and I have a second monitor. It's just a ViewSonic 15-inch monitor, but it's actually really cool, and it was really, really cheap. I got it on Amazon, and it plugs into my Mac via USB-C, and it's powered by USB-C. So there's no separate power brick or anything for it. It just plugs right in, and then it's ready to go. So I have that off to the side. So I use that as my monitor to monitor all the things that I'm doing, and then my screen is the one in front of me that I typically share, and I'm going to show you that in a second. And then the rest of the hardware setup, I've got a USB-C adapter, so I can plug in a bunch of USB devices and my microphone. I'm actually, the microphone you're hearing now, this is a Rode NT USB Mini. It's a pretty cheap USB microphone, but it's really, really powerful. I'm really happy with it, and it's small, and it travels very well. I've had it for a few weeks now. I had a Yeti Blue, and I've used that for years, and it's been great, but this one's hands down much, much better. Yeah. So I just run that in as USB audio, and then feed that right into the system.
So this, combined with the software that you're probably about to talk about, is probably my first purchase coming out of today. I've got a Yeti, I've got the Snowball, the blue Snowball, not Yeti. I've got the blue Snowball at home, and it's been fine. I've got it mounted on an arm and everything. But I really like some of the capabilities that you were describing with this, plus how portable it is. That blue Snowball is massive.
I do have the blue Yeti too, and it's got great sound quality, but it is a huge microphone.
Right. Yeah, it's massive. The Rode NT USB Mini, it's smaller than a cell phone. It's heavy as a brick, but it's smaller than a cell phone, so it's really portable. And then the last piece of hardware I have is something that's been really popular in the SharePoint community for the last year or so, and that's the Elgato Stream Deck. If you're not familiar with the Stream Deck is a switching device. So I'll try to bring that up into the camera here.
Yep.
But basically, it's a hardware switching device, and you're setting hotkeys and shortcuts on it, and that allows me to power my all the software stuff that I'm doing. So I use it as a scene switcher using a tool called OBS, which I'll talk about in a minute.
Yep.
But I've got the Stream Deck programmed so that like I've got a single button that opens Teams and takes me right into the calendar and shows me like my next meeting. I've got a button hardwired to mute my Teams audio. So like it's just like rather than having to toggle the mouse to bring up the menu or figure out which screen I'm on, I hit the mute button on the Stream Deck and it brings Teams to the forefront and then it mutes it. I also use it to launch Office applications like my PowerPoint and OneNote and Word. So like one click to like launch that, and I have to go and find it in my program files.
Right.
I launch other applications directly from it, and then at home I have two key lights, and they're controlled via Wi-Fi, and so I have buttons to go ahead and turn them on, and then I can also dim or I can make them brighter right from the Stream Deck. So that's all super helpful. And then I have a subfolder inside of here that I use when I present, and it has a list of the URLs that I give in live presentations on a regular basis. Like, here's a learning site, and
Right.
rather than just put it on the slide, I just put it in the chat, and it's one button.
Oh, that's awesome.
Shortcut.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's nice.
The Stream Deck, there's so many things you can do with it. And I saw some other members of the community buying it, and I was like, I've got to get one of these.
Yeah, so the crappy technologist that I am, I as soon as everybody started talking about, I'm gotta have that, I bought it, and
I think you programmed like the mute button.
no, I couldn't figure out how to do the mute button. So I have a Twitter button I press and I clicked and it sends out a, hey, let's have a great day tweet every day. But, it's got some other buttons that I don't even remember what I programmed. So I've got like 4 and I've never gotten back to it.
So we've clearly got work.
Yes, I've got work to do.
Yeah, you can do a single shortcut and hardwire that in it, but you can run macros in it, so you can have like multiple actions off of a single input. And man, that is a game changer. Like when you start getting into that, there's some really cool stuff you can do.
Well, I think I have never, like some of the stuff, so I'm maybe not imaginative, but until seeing it actually work in some of the stuff that you've done, now I'm going to go home and play with that. So.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun geeking out on this, and just kind of looking what other members of the community have done, and a lot of people share how they've actually built around it. So this is like all core to like my workflow. So normally I just have this set up on the desk at home, and I just go and log into the computer, and then I'm pretty much ready to go join the team's meeting, and I can kick things off. So I'm going to transition from last couple of things, I guess, hardware-wise. The camera is powered by a dummy battery. So it's hardwired into my power supply, so I don't have to worry about batteries dying on the camera. I don't have to worry about recording times or anything like that. I run this sometimes 8 hours straight.
That is pretty impressive.
Classroom, yeah. And the camera handles it like a champ. I'm using an older camera. It's a Sony a6500. You can find those used fairly affordable. And then I went and got a Sigma lens for it, and that gives me that nice background bokeh effect.
Okay.
So that's all the hardware component outside of my MacBook. That's the brains of the whole thing. So I'm going to move now into the software aspect of what I do. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my camera feed here in Teams. And I'm going to actually switch over to, let me actually start my virtual cam. All right, so I'm going to switch over. I'm just going into my device settings, and I'm switching from the hardware input. I'm switching to a virtual cam, and so now I am using OBS.
And so we can, the most immediate change there is the SharePoint Fest logo is now on your ear, right about your ear there.
Yep.
So one thing I wanted to point out is you are not sharing your desktop.
No.
Where our camera feeds are still there, same size. If you had just gone share desktop, that whole view would have changed. So that's the first thing we're pointing out to people who don't know what's going on.
Yep. So all I did was just change the camera feed. So I'm using a virtual cam, and this has worked on Windows pretty much nonstop, but it stopped working in the Mac world last year around June, and it was like 10 months before the feature was re-enabled through some of the configuration that Microsoft had done to Teams.
Gotcha.
So the virtual cams work now in both environments, thankfully.
Yep.
And so I can use a virtual cam input, which is what I'm doing here. So the virtual cam that I'm actually using is from, I'm using OBS. That's Open Broadcast Studio. It's free. It's community sourced, but there are a number of large entities that are contributing to it. Like, for example, Facebook is a sponsor, and they help keep the project alive. So it's a community-aware project. OBS is super, super powerful, and it can get really technical, but at the core, it's not all that different than creating a PowerPoint presentation. So I use OBS to create scenes, and what you're actually seeing is a scene. It's my main camera. I'm centered on the screen, 1080 resolution, and I've just got the SharePoint Fest logo on that. But because I have a number of different scenes, I can do some really cool stuff. One of my favorites is to take me and overlay me on top of my desktop. So I'm going to move the OBS tool out of view, just kind of move that off to the side. But like, let's say I move to another window. So here you're seeing, a SharePoint site that I demo off of, and I'm overlaid on top of that in the lower corner. I've got a nice little border, and then if for some reason, like I'm blocking something on the screen, I've got a second scene that'll actually move me over to the other side of the screen. And it's got a nice smooth transition actually built into it. So I can do things like this, and I picked this up from the gaming community. If you ever watch anybody on Twitch, they're playing whatever, Mario Kart 8, and then they're overlaid on top of it. And that's really cool. I need to figure out how to do that. And so OBS allows me to do that. And then if I need to go to just the desktop, I can move me out of view, nice transition, and still keep the logo there and show that. Now, as you're watching this on your screen, because it's a virtual cam, one thing to know about Teams is that depending with the dynamic view, it will bring the, let me go back to me, it will bring the side of that image in. So with the virtual cam, it'll cut off some things. So there's kind of a way around that, using, this software, and I'm going to show you an example of that. So one of the things that OBS does really well is there's this thing called a projector output.
Okay.
And when I do a projector output, I can do like, as a full screen projector output. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my camera, and I'm going to do a screen share now, and I'm going to share that projector, or let me actually change that. So
share the hidden screen. All the goods are over there.
Yes.
All right. So I'm just going to share, and now I'm sharing my whole screen.
Right.
But it looks like a webcam, and I still get, the overlay, depending on like what my background is.
Infinity and beyond.
But doing this, it gives a full screen presentation in there, and I can still like control, the camera or whatever. And so this is actually really helpful, and just to give you an idea of like what it looks like I'll go out of the full screen mode. So like this is the little projector window that I display, and I just blow it up to a full screen view and put it on my second monitor, and users can see it. And then I can still work with all the other software. So here's, OBS. Let me actually bring this over and put these on the same desktop. So like, this is the OBS tool.
Okay.
And then this is the projector output. And so if you do the projector, it doesn't do the crop. If you do the virtual cam output, it does a little bit of the crop because it thinks it's a camera. Now, you're going to see here the actual OBS software. So what I've done here is I've just got a series of scenes, and then each scene has a couple of sources in it. So this is my main scene, main screen, and I've got a camera feed, and then I got the SharePoint Fest logo. And so just like PowerPoint, you can turn things on or off inside of it, make it visible, and then you use layering. So things that are on the bottom are on the bottom of the layer, and then things that are on the top of that window are on the top. So if you can use PowerPoint, you can do this. And so how do we create the desktop? Well, you go and you add a scene, and you just point to the desktop. So you bring in the desktop, and then you can overlay whatever you want on top of that. And then when you combine something like the main camera on top of the desktop, and you can just position, it's just like dragging and dropping objects, just like in a PowerPoint. And then the Stream Deck just has a simple one-click, let me move this. I went a little bit further than with this. I did some really cool stuff. I think it's cool. I don't know.
I was going to say, because nothing you've done so far is cool, so please.
So one of the things that I thought would be really neat is like when it's actually time to go on a break, just having a countdown and letting people know, hey, we're going to be back in 15 minutes.
Yep.
So I've got a screen that does that.
Yeah.
And it's got a countdown timer built into it. So it just counts down from 15. So every time I go into that scene, it just resets to 15 minutes, and then it starts counting down.
Yeah.
And that was pretty easy to do in OBS. You have to use a script. These are free. They're easy to get to. So it's called the Advanced Timer Lua, and I've just got this little menu over here, and I can tell it, how long I want to count down and like what text source to use. I have to point it to a text source.
Okay.
So this is my text source right here. I've got two on the screen. I got the timer.
Yep.
And then I've got the take a break. So I just added text. It's just a text input. Yeah, and so that gives me the countdown timer. So this is one version, and then I did another one because this one has a little video that plays. The coffee's kind of spinning around in there. I was like, that's kind of neat.
Okay.
Fancy.
So, I mean, it's a value add. Like if you're in a virtual classroom and you went on break, and people come back and they're like, have we started back yet? this is playing, and there's some motion, and then there's the countdown timer, and so they know break's not over yet. Yeah. It also gives me a chance to rest my voice so people aren't asking me questions and I have to respond.
My cheap, easy to do way lately has just been pulling up OneNote and sharing that and saying, be back at 10:15.
Right.
So
This is definitely a nicer way to do it.
Yeah. Oh, and this, I don't have to type in the chat window and, take 2 minutes to do that. And then, it allows me to actually step away so that I do get that rest, from talking all day. And then the other one that I did, and this was inspired by 2 of our friends in the community, Tracy Vandersnife and John Moore. They did some stuff like this with Teams meetings and PowerPoint, and I was like, that's cool. Let me bring this into OBS. So this is one of my welcome screens. So It's got just a little video animation that plays in the background, and then there's a countdown timer on that. I can set that to a specific hour and minute, and that's what it's counting down to. So
Gotcha.
we're going to be starting in blah, and you can put text on the screen and say, starting in whatever, and I can switch out the logo.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I can repurpose it, and if the video that's playing has audio, I can play
Turn
the audio
on and push that through.
So the idea of this was because when you join a Teams meeting and the presentation is getting ready to start, what are the end users saying? They
is there any audio?
Have we started yet?
Right.
I can't hear anything. Is my audio working? I don't see anything. Has the presentation started? If I turn the audio on for this, 3 things happen. They log in, and right away, they know the connection works.
Yep.
They see motion, so they know things, things are happening, and the audio can add to that, so they know the audio video is working. And they know the presentation hasn't started yet, so they don't have to ask, and I don't have to, start early. So it's kind of like a lobby, for the presentation to start. And I've got 2 versions of this. This one's pretty fun, but I really like this one a lot.
Yeah, this one's pretty slick.
And I used this on my workshop on Monday, and I had just had it on the screen. It's I'm getting setting up, and I'm reviewing my notes and things on my second monitor. This is just playing on the big projector.
Yep.
Because I took this little window here, and I just broadcast this. I put it on. I extended my monitors rather than mirroring. I extended, and I just put this on the big projector.
That's cool.
And I just left it there, and then I broadcast my OBS feed to the projector, and so whatever I do on the desktop is what they're getting on the screen, and I don't have to mirror the screen and deal with the different resolutions. And so this was just playing, until it was time to start, and then when it was time for the main presentation, I just switched over and went into my camera feed, and I'm like, hey everyone, I'm Andy, welcome to SharePoint Fest. I sat down and delivered my presentation for most of the day, so I tried to do the eye contact with the camera, and then here I am, and then I would switch into the various desktops, and then we would, do our presentation. And, they told me a few times, hey, you're blocking this. So I'd move myself over and,
right.
Transition. But it gave the ability for me to, allow people in the back of the room to see me, and while still broadcasting. But I use this in Teams all the time for the same purposes. It keeps me on the screen.
Right.
And so, keeps people engaged, and then they can see the content, and then, we can work from there.
Yeah.
So this has been a big part of my workflow. It's just learning how to set up OBS and then learning the nuances of running a virtual cam or running a projector and how to get that to the window. But I learned all of this live streaming, and I'm like, why don't we do this in a classroom scenario and bring that to our training stuff?
Yep.
And then
that's awesome.
There was a Microsoft MVP out of Australia. I believe his last name's Kellerman, and he was talking about his virtual classroom in his home office, and he did some crazy stuff. And so he's got 3 separate cameras in the room, and he's got one seen from the waist up. And I'm like, how can I do that but do it in a box? And this is kind of my solution to that. And then the last couple of things that I do when I'm working with this is. Let me switch over to my other monitor. So stop that share, and then we'll share this one. So this is my my second monitor. And so what I do in any presentation is I have Teams, running over there. If I'm in a meeting like we are, I have the meeting interface running over on that screen. So I can see, the 2 of you over there. And so I'm monitoring that. out of the corner of my eye, or if I'm at home, it's directly below my camera. So like I'm looking at you, but I'm looking at my camera at the same time.
Cool.
And then I keep things like the chat window open. So I see all questions and comments and things coming in. The participants window, I can, pay attention to that. And so I can keep track of all that. So I literally use the second monitor as a monitor to see everything's happening. So I brought that along so I could run that, and then my desktop was clean for the presentation.
Right.
And then the projector in the room on Monday was for the output. And then I've got a couple other little things. So OBS is free, and you can plug it into Teams and you can run with it. It's really cool. And then the other thing is because I've got the Rode microphone, this specific microphone has free software called Rode Connect. And that allows me to input up to 4 of these NT USB mini microphones. And I can control everything in there from there's a noise gate and a compressor.
Okay.
So that allows me to, you don't hear my fan going. You don't hear clicks of the mouse or, the keyboard. You don't hear ambient noise in the room. When I stop talking and running my mouth, it gets quiet.
Yeah.
It's also got an exciter and a big bottom. The big bottom gives you that radio bassy voice. And then the exciter just kind of adjusts the midtones a little bit. And that's built right into the Rode Connect software. And then you can adjust the level of when these things kick in. And then there's a fader. You can adjust the level. So it's basically a virtual sound mixer. And speaking of virtual sound mixer, I can input the system and virtual audio into that as well. So if I want to run my computer audio through that, play a video, I can run it through there.
Okay.
And then the other thing that's really cool about this is it's got these built-in audio feeds. So I can go over here and say, hey, this is really cool. And
all right. So if we start, if you start hearing a live studio audience in our podcasts, you probably know where it came from.
And these buttons, you can adjust for whatever sounds you want. And I think you've got a ridiculous number of buttons that you can define. And you can even replace the defaults. So if you wanted to do intro music for your podcast.
Yep. You can have that kick off. That's really cool.
Yeah.
We're going to need to use the Cricket one a lot.
No.
So that's free. You just need the Rode microphone for it. And I didn't use that in the workshop Monday. I'm still working that into my workflow when I present. But doing live streaming stuff, moving forward, I think that's going to be something that I definitely bring into into that scenario. So, do you have to use all this stuff? No. Is it kind of a flex? Yeah, a little bit.
Kind of a flex.
It's a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun learning this, and my whole thing. I'm gonna switch back to just my input. Yeah. My whole thing is I'm just trying to find a value add for the training to keep people engaged virtually, because we have so many virtual meetings and remote stuff, and this is the first time most of us have been in a live environment in 18 months. Yeah. I'm just trying to find a way to keep people engaged. And so I'm constantly adding scenes. I'm constantly adding, this piece there. It does complicate the workflow a little bit. It's overkill in some situations, but if I can keep people engaged for another 30 minutes.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to do the all day. I do a bunch of workshops with all day stuff and trying to keep people engaged. And I think we've heard a number of times here how many people are tired of virtual training. Mm-hmm. So anything you can do to spice it up's got to help.
Yeah. No, I mean, Andy, go ahead and click that button. Give yourself a round of applause, because this is a really cool setup. This has been, there it is. I definitely have some envy over what you're doing there. And, it brings me back to when I first got into podcasting 15 years ago. I did a podcast following the Dallas Stars. And we did a couple of live in restaurant events at the things, and I had an M Audio USB adapter to the laptop and XLR mics through a soundboard, and so clearly I've stopped caring that much, but seeing what's possible and really how easy it is once it's set up, and the benefit that comes. So it's really cool. I
agree.
My wife might get mad at where some of my spending cash goes for a few months. We'll have to see.
I'm not going to lie, I spent a lot of time thinking about how I'm going to connect all this stuff. I tried to make this portable. I put this on this little 15 by 10 inch cocoon elastic band thing to bring it here with me. But I think if I travel with something like this again, I'm going to get a Pelican hard case and try to just have everything pre-wired. So I get one connector into my laptop and like run from there.
That would be pretty sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see the next SharePoint Fest how it evolves. But like when I get home, most of this is just going to get blocked onto the desk and go from there. And the next thing for me is figuring out how to use the Ronin SC gimbal. There's some facial tracking software in that, and so what I want to do is set that up in the room, and I want to be able to stand and deliver like I'm in an actual classroom, and you know, maybe move from one side of the room to another and have the camera follow me. So that's the next thing to figure out is how I can implement that as part of this process, and like basically turn my office into a virtual classroom and provide more of that in-person experience. But, you know, we'll see how it goes. It'll be fun.
No, that's exciting to see. So out of curiosity, as we wrap up, Andy, how can people reach out to you, whether it's because they want to learn more about this or they want to, you know, learn about getting training from you on the rest of your day job?
Main way to contact me, I'm definitely active on Twitter, at Andy Huneycutt, and I'm a Weird Huneycutt, Huneycutt. You'll also find me on LinkedIn, and I'm William Huneycutt there. That's I go by Andy, but my first name is William. Yeah,
okay,
thanks, parents. Appreciate that. No, I'm William Huneycutt on LinkedIn. Either of those two channels are a great way to reach out to me. I also have my website, upskilltech.com, so upskill tech.com. So that's a good way to reach out to me as well.
Cool.
And Jay will be sure to put links to those in the show notes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Andy, again, thank you so much. Really excited that we started talking last night. This has been a fun conversation. I probably should wrap up here and go enjoy the day and grab some lunch.
I appreciate the opportunity. This is a lot of fun to talk and
you should be proud of like your setup. It's awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool.
And thanks,
Cheers.
Lance, for helping us.
Yes, thank you, Lance. Congratulations, you're on our podcast. All 17 listeners. We know you liked this episode of This Week in Teams because you're still listening. So if you want to hear more like this, make sure you click the subscribe button, notifications, and go to onthespot.tech for more from This Week in Teams and our sibling podcasts.